Hello, everyone. I'll just give it a couple minutes here, but give everyone a chance to join before we get started. But it'll just be about 2 minutes. Okay, well, I'm going to go ahead and get started here. Good morning, everybody, or afternoon. I'm Mike Harrison. I run strategic initiatives. I'm the director of strategic initiatives at BioForward, and I'm here to welcome you to today's webinar. The webinar topic today is on laboratory management tools. Before we get started, I just wanted to give a brief announcement, which is our next webinar is on February 8th, and that is on the topic of cybersecurity insurance for your business. And that is with BioFord members Aberdeen and the Houseman Group. So be sure to check on that. I believe the registration page is already up for that. So you can go ahead and click on that and register today. And as far as today's webinar goes, if you have any questions during the webinar, please put your questions in the chat and we'll address them at the end of the session. So just put them in right away, and I'll be looking at that, and we will get to them near the end. So before we get started, I just wanted to say I think this is a very important topic. I spent a lot of time in laboratories, and when I was in laboratories, we were doing a lot of work just in paper lab notebooks. There was some early tools, but we were mostly working on binders and loose sheets of paper stapled all over the place, and it was quite challenging. And since those Stone Ages, we've come a long way, and there's a lot of digital tools out there to support people that work in laboratories to manage the tremendous amount of data and information that goes through a modern laboratory. Um, so to help us all learn more about those different types of technologies, we have two speakers today. Both of them are from BioForward member SciNote. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Wade Opperman, who is the Senior Account Executive for SciNote. Wade? We can't hear
No, I
you.
think we can hear you. Wait.
There we go. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Wade Opperman. Thank you for taking time out of your very busy schedules today to meet with us. It's greatly appreciated. I am the senior account executive for SciNote, based and right now in Wisconsin. So, we'll be happy to go through this presentation with you here today with my counterpart, Theresa. So let me start out and basically talk a little bit about SciNote itself. So with SciNote, we are about a 8-year-old organization. We have well over 100,000 users of our product that range from in every genre of research that you can imagine, all across the world. And in everything from private sector with everyone from Fortune 100 companies such as QIAGEN and Agilent, all the way down to startups and everyone in between. And in the governmental realm, I'm very proud to say that the FDA works with our software exclusively across their network, something we're very proud of. But we also work with USDA and other governmental organizations in similar ways. And we also work with entire universities, schools, and individual labs around the planet. Okay, I have over 7 years of experience in this position and 7 years of experience in working with electronic lab notebooks. So I'd be happy to be a future resource for you and your group moving forward. Um, with today, what we're going to cover is basically the general information of what an ELN is, why and when to use an ELN, the return on investments for ELNs, and how to choose an ELN, as well as some use cases to kind of maybe put it into perspective for you and your group moving forward. So, what is an electronic lab notebook? Well, since the time of Da Vinci and Galileo, has been recording information in conventional paper notebooks. Now, the world has obviously changed, and we're working not only in paper worlds, but we're also working more and more in digital worlds. So, you may also be utilizing other programs like Excel, Word, access databases, drives, you name it, OneNote, things like this to organize your data. But those often have limitations, as you're probably well aware of. And this has kind of evolved into specified programs that are customizable to help you go through and very easily record your data, collaborate, share, and report on all of this information in various ways. So things like data and SOP management, inventory and stock management, other productivity, collaboration, and other features, and wrapping this all around with compliance and data security and protection as well. So, why do people use electronic lab notebooks in the lab? They do this because of the higher level of productivity that you can give them in a number of ways. The first one is to effectively and safely store and manage data securely in the cloud. You're not at the mercy of having data stored in one location or on everybody's, basically notebooks or computers where you could have a single source of failure if you lose or that data is destroyed. You also have the capability of going through and taking other ancillary activities such as inventory and stock management and your individual unique lab processes and having those customized processes put in one place where it's very easy and efficiently and using collaborating with other users to share that data. You can go through and very easily use electronic lab notebooks to go through and meet the wide needs of regulatory requirements, such as GLP, GMP compliance, 21 CFR Part 11 FDA compliance, like we provide for the FDA, and even QA QC needs in a GXP environment. And you can basically go through again to facilitate efficient discussion and collaboration of that ideas and information across your entire group very easily. You can also go through and prevent data loss and having to recreate the wheel, so to speak, with that data as you go through the life cycle of your organization. So, when to use an electronic lab notebook versus other software. And if you can kind of envision this, if maybe you were in a startup organization or started up with an organization, maybe it was you or just one other or a couple other people working together, and you could kind of keep a handle or keep control of basically the collaboration or sharing of data, right? It's pretty easy in those aspects. But as you start growing, you start working into challenges. So, you've got different files, different information. You might have been able to get by with paper notebooks or a combination of electronic files to store that data. But as you grow, it becomes more and more of a challenge to collaborate, share, report on that data. And when you think about the different sources of data you're dealing with, not only what you create, but if you're pulling in information from equipment, instrumentation, other third party software packages, this quickly grows to be an unmanageable system to manage these tools. And you find yourself spending more and more time managing the system rather than actually doing your work. And as you grow, you reach a certain point where maybe a laboratory information management system you think may assist you. And this is basically more tools and more structure for going through and helping you collaborate, share, and report on your data and pulling in additional information. Now, the nice thing about that is that overlap you see in the middle is a nice place where SciNote actually fits in rather nicely. While we are a truly electronic lab notebook system, we have elements of laboratory information management systems and other tools built inside of SciNote that make us a hybrid system that you can use before you actually move into a laboratory information management system, which can be very complex to install and very costly from just a dollar point of view as well as an intensity point of view. Whereas like electronic lab notebook like SciNote is very easy and very simple to implement into your daily schedule. Now, you also have, as I've kind of touched on earlier, as I move on to the next slide, you see here that you also have other elements, and I'm sure you're aware of this too. You may have third-party systems, ERP systems, inventory management systems, data warehouse, QMS systems, instrumentation, equipment, databases, basically anywhere that you're storing data that you might want to integrate or share or collaborate with. And that adds another level of complexity. SciNote is very unique in the industry in the fact that we have a complete open API capability, which allows to pull any digital data from any third-party source. Again, think your instrumentation, microscopes, QMS systems, basically anything from an instrumentation or equipment standpoint and any other data from databases or other computer systems, anything you see on this page, and including LIMS systems, where you can pull that data into SciNote, effortlessly keep it updated, and even push that information back out in a bilateral interface so you can update those other third-party systems. And it's an overused term, but the Internet of Things in the lab is fundamentally what SciNote is. We have that capability to connect SciNote to those other third-party systems, making that process very much effortless for you and your group. So with this takes us into the obvious question of return on investment for ELNs. And return on investment for ELNs is varied in different ways. The first one is the key for key ROIs. You can look at this in a number of ways. The first one is data security and safety. I've been doing this again for 7 years, and I've heard, unfortunately, some terrible horror stories. I've heard a horror story of 50 years of paper notebooks that were stored in a basement that unfortunately were destroyed by sewage. I've heard of key members of teams that unfortunately and unexpectedly passed away, and all of their data went with them. And unfortunately, other people could not read paper notebooks or understand their file systems. So with SciNote, we have the ability to take that image that you see there with the stacks of paper and basically digitize that information, put it into one place where it's searchable, and made very collaborative of nature. Kind of, quietly that most people don't also think about is the fact that a lot of digital data isn't in a user-friendly format as well. You may have databases or computer systems that you have the data inside, but it's not user-friendly. It's not easy to share or connect that information with your projects or your experiments that you're working on. And again, that's lost time and effort for you and your group. And SciNote can really help you with that with the API from the aspect of going through and pulling in that digital data. With the paper data, we can help you digitize and tie all that information to any of your workflow and eliminate that single point of failure where you might have data stored with different people or locations and put it in one place where it's backed up and security is paramount. Regarding with this, for those of you that have to deal with compliance factors, and we may be talking about here GLP compliance, GMP compliance, 21 CFR Part 11, FDA compliance, any kind of GXP compliance for QA or QC. So any of those lines, you may be thinking, where does this fit in? Well, as you're aware, these standards and compliance factors are often hard to keep in place and effectively make people adhere to them. With SciNote, this can be an effortless process. The system, your requirements can be built into the system. So as you're just doing your workflow, it works in the background. You don't have to really think about it in those aspects where it's searchable and reportable. And for instance, for 21 CFR Part 11 FDA compliance, and that the fact, again, that the FDA uses our software in those areas that if you do any submissions to the FDA or have audits, those groups actually use SciNote today. So there may be symmetries to making your work easier in those elements. Okay, so there's a couple factors with this that can make those elements easier. Also, if there's one thing I'd like you to take away from the compliance factors is most people underestimate, unfortunately, when they need to be compliant in their environments. And typically what we found in working with customers is if you think you need to be compliant, you actually needed to be compliant 6 months to a year or more previous to that. And the challenges with that, of course, is if you're not prepared, if you're not set, you have to go back and recreate that data, which can be an enormous headache in many ways. In addition to this, we have a simple ROI for time savings here with SciNote. So with the efficiencies, the collaborations, the searching, and the sharing information to make all of these processes effortless inside of our system, we actually did studies in working with our customer, our existing customer use base of over 100,000 users. We asked an open-ended question to these folks. We said, how much time, if any, are you saving on a weekly basis by using SciNote? And there, of course, were variables from 0 on to many hours. But the average answer that came back from our customers was the average user saves 9 hours per week by utilizing SciNote as an electronic lab notebook for recording and reporting their data. Now, that's no guarantee you're going to save that, but even if you could save half of that hours, can you imagine what you do with an extra 4 to 9 hours of time per week by utilizing SciNote? So these elements, I think, could be important to you for the future. And the efficient collaboration aspects for SciNote, I think, are often understated. Today, a lot of people, if you want to collaborate and you're using combination paper or electronic systems, typically you have to take the information that you have and put it into a report form, sit down, have a meeting, share your information, talk about it. You may have to elaborate, spend time tying in additional information. And as we get back to what we were talking about just on the time savings alone earlier, you see where you can start saving a lot of that time by using an ELN, because inside of SciNote, the data is inside of the system. And with a few mouse clicks, you can go through and create customized reports on the information and effortlessly share that with anyone in your team to do reporting or presentations. So basically with that, I'd like to turn that over to Theresa Liao, who is our content specialist here at SciNote, and she can take over.
All right, so I was just talking to myself and totally forgot to unmute myself. Thank you, Wade. So one of the questions that we get really often is, even in the deciding to purchase an ELN process is how do I choose the right ELN for my lab? So there are a few things that we would like to, encourage you to think about what to look for in an ELN. So number one is that if you identify a certain challenge you need to resolve in the lab, then you want to make sure that there are features in the ELN that will help you resolve the challenges you're facing. Another thing to consider is that, we talk about time saving factor. Are there features within the ELN that can help you significantly improve and streamline your process? That's another consideration. So if you have a process in place and the ELN can automate or streamline that process for you, that's something to consider. Another thing that's important is data protection and security. How the vendor actually treats security requirements. Is your data protected? Are there features to help you to make sure that asset security is maintained? Are there backups? How many backups? How often? Those are the questions to ask. And next would be customer success. Does the vendor provide any onboarding or training? Is there any cost to it? What we hear very often is that people buy ELN and then go, hey, we need some help with this. Go back to the vendor say, oh, it costs another $10,000 for you to get help from us. So that's something to keep in mind. For training and onboarding staff members, are there additional training materials like videos, knowledge base that you can share among your staff members as well is an important consideration. Finally, connectivity. We talk about, the Internet of Things in the lab. We talk about connecting instruments or any other data sources to come into your electronic lab notebook. So make sure that the software offers API for connectivity or other options for instrument or system connectivity. It's also very important to keep in mind, you're not just looking for something with API. You also want to look at, something with API that has good quality API. For example, if the vendor update the API documentation regularly, they update their endpoints regularly, they maintain a very clear API structure, those are the things to look for when it comes to vendor and electronic lab notebook systems. So we asked several users how they select an ELN, and here are some examples. So New Way Pharma actually has a very systematic way. So Jonas actually come up with an Excel spreadsheet, and you can actually download the Excel spreadsheet from provided by him on using the QR code. But basically, they went through a needs analysis, like I mentioned, figuring out what challenges you want to resolve, and do a market research, looking at third-party reviews out there, looking at different websites of ELNs, looking at what features they provide, and then go down to a selection. And that's where the Excel spreadsheet come into play, is that he has a numerical system of giving scores to different features, and then eventually choose one that meet their requirements, and as well as have additional good to have and things with the ELN. So that's one option. Another one is Ingenza. Ingenza actually went through the process of, have a dedicated person to do market research. So it's important to have like a person responsible for it and bring the information back to the team. And also similarly, establish a list of non-negotiables and pick the top candidates. So here are some of their non-negotiables, and they need to make sure that those things are met with the ELN that they select. But also other factors like the good to have, things that will help you streamline and automate your process to save you more time. And then went through the trial period and have a final good decision. So that's an example from Ingenza. Finally, I want to share the example of Phycyrus because very similar process, but the difference is that they're not looking for a new, like from paper to ELN. They're actually looking to switch from another ELN to SciNote. And the process, the reason why they wanted to do that is because even though they had an ELN, it was so difficult to use and nobody was actually using it. So they ended up sending files and attachments still through emails, which is not what the ELN is supposed to be, work in the company. So what they did is that they know it's a user experience and the quality kind of, they need to do a qualitative evaluation of how their lab members actually use the ELN instead of just having a checklist of features. So what they did is that they actually signed an NDA and actually test the ELNs. They have a few candidates and they test the ELNs with real lab data and make sure that, team members actually had the experience using the ELN during the trial period and making sure that they actually are happy with it and look at how they experience the ELN. And that's one of the more in-depth experience, but something that can be critical for teams, especially if you have users, who really need to get into that process and understand how the ELN can work for them. Next, I would like to go through some example use cases, and these are the use cases that correspond to a few ROIs that Wade actually talked about previously. And these are some of the biotech lab use cases that, examples with using SciNote. So first of all, we can look at streamline lab process. Ingenza, the example that I mentioned earlier, they're really looking for making sure that the ability to manage data digitally because paper is no longer efficient. They're looking for opportunities to collaborate through the electronic lab notebook between different teams. They're looking for quality management because their quality department demand and requires the software that enables a full traceability within the system. So they actually have customers that they work with. Basically, each time that there's a new customer joining, using their service, they set up a layout. And one thing I'm I think we're really proud of with SciNote is that we have a different, a little bit of a different interface. You can see that the workflow that Ingenza set up is actually a non-linear workflow. Traditionally, you will see ELN vendors provide something more linear, more or less because we're, ELN mostly came from the paper notebook. So there is some similarities there. But on the other hand, paper notebook is not always the best to organize things like non-linear workflow because you go sequential instead of having to branch out. So this is a great example of how having that accommodation for the non-linear workflow actually can be very efficient. And in the case of Ingenza, they actually have a process in place for each customer that they work with, and they basically follow through that workflow. And you can easily copy that workflow to use with another customers. And that's how Ingenza set up their process to streamline their workflow, to streamline their lab processes using SciNote. Another example is data consolidation, inventory management. So this is a use case from academia, but they, like I know Marcus used the inventory management system very thoroughly. You can see he set up here. But the difficulty he encountered, especially after not having access to the lab after 1 or 2 years during COVID, is that difficulty with data management from multiple sources, or it could be that some student wrote something in the lab notebook and then somehow come back, don't know where it went. Another thing is inventory management, because you have lab notebook, but you cannot really trace it back to a particular reagent that's being used in the experiment. And like I mentioned, you come back into the lab, you ask your student, the student go, well, I don't really know which particular reagent was actually used. So this is why Marcus ended up taking up SciNote and using an inventory management system to manage all the inventory. And the inventory management system comes with an inventory card, item card, which you can use to learn, access the information. But also, if you look at this slide a little bit more carefully, closely, the background of the slide is actually a notebook page that you can easily use our smart annotation system to refer to an inventory item. So that ensures that you can trace all the way back to exactly which inventory item was used in an experiment. And that traceability feature is really helpful for not just Marcus, a lot of people we talk to make sure you can really trace back and don't lose that connection with the data. Marcus also used our SciNote app regularly, so students can actually check off the protocol steps at the bench and as they go for each step, so they wouldn't don't need to worry about losing track halfway through. Another RI that Wade mentioned was cross-team collaboration. So here we have Pharma, which is a German biotech company. They also are looking to bridge different lab teams, ensure that they improve the communication between. They're also looking for improved data sharing and on the data management side. So here is basically an overview of how they use SciNote to help them facilitate the collaboration, within their lab group. So for example, they were able to allow easy data access and make sure that team members have access to data when they need to. Again, you setting up sort of workflow of the process that I do and attaching data results with each item within the workflow. So that's something that I do. Another thing that they found SciNote useful was because you can have a chat box inside SciNote. You can actually assign tasks to other team members, or you can even add a team member. So something like what we see in chat or Slack is that you can add a team member. So we can do that in SciNote as well here, and to make sure to facilitate that communication and have the discussion right where the data is. Finally, they use the workflow system I mentioned earlier to allow them to kind of manage their chemicals and columns, and help them to kind of also have that traceability. And that's another thing that I do in the lab to make sure that they have that quality control, quality management side of things cared for, where they can trace how manage the traceability of their chemicals. Now here is another example of, here's an example of the prevention of the lost data due to turnover. Now, Kelly worked with a lot of students in the lab, and she worked closely with undergraduate students, which means that the turnover is pretty high because the undergrad student usually work in the lab for 4 months time. Maybe it's a summer student, maybe it's a co-op student that will only work for a term. And that's the reason why Kelly need to make sure that any data that they generate doesn't disappear after the student leave the lab. And even if 5 years down the road, sometimes when you publish a paper for her, you need to go back to like the experiments that was done 4 or 5 years ago. And that's when data management gets really critical. And Kelly used SciNote to help manage that and make sure that, because the lab handles like behavior research, it's very multidisciplinary. You need to track not just animal, but also chemicals and reagents and their behavior. So there's a lot of things that can happen, a lot of analysis that need to be done. And that's again where that non-linear workflow system that we have in SciNote that allows you to plan your experiment in a non-linear way and make sure you can track the stages of different experiments. That's something that Kelly really take advantage of. Someone did ask, okay, Kelly, this looks really complicated. Like, is it easy to set up? And Kelly said, it's actually easy to set up because at the end of the day, each one is a linear path. It's whether how you present it, right? So once you start setting up, once you finish setting up, and you can actually see the big picture of your experiment. And that has been really helpful for a lot of our users to be able to see that big picture, overall picture, instead of, a very linear, very limited view of your work. Kelly also used the inventory management system very thoroughly, as well as like what Marcus did, and have a naming convention being able to trace back to that very specific inventory item. And Kelly used that efficiently as well in her lab. Okay, I have a few more examples to go over. Very quickly, so R&D with quality management needs. So here we have Marcus. It's from Dynamic Code, which is a Sweden-based health and diagnostic test company. They have an R&D department, but they also have a very stringent quality management requirement because of the IVDR requirements. So what they did is they use SciNote to manage the bench R&D use, but they are able to export the report using SciNote's report generator and use that PDF report as part of their quality management system, so that it can very efficiently kind of allows you to do that track, and also allows the R&D personnel to very easily set that up because the EQMS system is actually pretty cumbersome to use. That they didn't want the R&D people to have to deal with that. They just want very limited a number of people to be able to access and manage the EQMS system. So they were able to establish a workflow that allows them to really easily set up that process and to meet the regulatory requirement. And here, Marcus, I actually talked to Marcus, and sorry, not Marcus, Magnus. Magnus actually echoed what Wei said earlier, which is that if you know you need to meet some regulatory requirement, you need to think ahead because it always takes longer to set up that environment and to meet the requirements. So this is why Magnus did a lot of work with his team to make sure that this thing is set up properly to meet those requirements. All right, and the next one is a little bit of an API. This is an API that is on a smaller scale. So Advanced Cellular Dynamics is actually a Seattle-based CRO. And what they do is that they use SciNote's API very effectively. For example, they are able to use the API to sync a SharePoint inventory that I have previously set up so that they can synchronize inventory items in SharePoint with the SciNote system. And they also use the SciNote system to help isolate each customer's inventory export and the customer's lab entries. And what this helped them to do is to make sure that there is no crossover between different clients' data, so that one client's data is in a very protected environment from another client's data. And that helped them to make sure, ensure the efficiency in exporting the data and the information for the client. Finally, Sean actually also set up this web interface so that their team members can use that web interface for entry that goes directly into SciNote. So that's something that they take advantage with the SciNote API to be able to build with that streamline of system to help with data management. So that's a more, within the company level to kind of help use API to kind of streamline that management. Now, coming to a bigger scale of things, now Fox Pharma is a Boston-based biopharmaceutical company. I was, talking to Dave. Fox Pharma's scenario is more, a bigger scale when it comes to data. And what they need is really to make sure there is a synchronized up-to-date inventory without overloading the system that will cause disruptions. And they actually sync to a compound system, compound inventory system, which, the API allows them to kind of push and update information into the SciNote inventory efficiently and help to do that. They also utilize webhooks, and I think this might be the next example, which is a similar scenario with webhook. Is when it comes to API, it's a lot of like you need to tell the API to pull or push information. With webhook, if something is changed, then that gets updated automatically. So they use that for the assay data warehouse ingestion. So Dave has built a system also to help them with synchronization of a larger, like the data in a larger scale of things. And that's what they find APIs being extremely helpful when it comes to keeping everything in sync and making sure that information is up to date. So I think that's sort of like a lot of the examples I went through. I also went through very quickly. So if there is additional questions, please feel free to leave a question in the chat. Thank you very much. And then, yeah, I'll pass it back to Michael.
Thanks, Theresa. Yeah, so if anyone has any questions, please drop them in the chat. While we're kind of waiting for that, I had just a quick, you answered a lot of the questions that I had before before the session started, but I had a couple questions. One, like just thinking back to my own lab experience, like some of the problems that I dealt with, and I wanted to know, so as far as like integration with lab equipment. So you said you have this open API, so you can kind of directly interact with a lot of lab equipment. Does this involve like also keeping like all the records on like maintenance, calibration, booking, like so that people don't get double booked and all of that? How extensive are those connections?
Yeah, I could take that. I could take that question. So really, the interfaces can do a myriad of different things, and really, it's all customizable. They can pull in entire files or discrete data points like temperature or pH, and any type of time schedule you want. So if you're looking for something like a second by second reading on up to once a day or whatever you need, you can very easily do that. And really, you can pull any digital data from a third party source. Now, the devil's in the details with that. And what we normally offer with our review process for SciNote is the opportunity, if you have extensive needs for interconnections with other third party systems, we can meet with our development group and we can put on paper what can and cannot be done. So in detail, there are no surprises for you moving forward, which is often a challenge when you're talking about integrating this technology. We're taking all the stress and all the challenges out of that in those elements. But specifically to your point, Michael, with going through and tracking information, actually the things that you listed can be done inside of SciNote with our advanced inventory capabilities that we have inside of the program. So if you want to track things like calibrations, cleanings, sign-outs, scheduling, certifications, trainings for individuals on your equipment, you basically can track that all inside of the software and get alerts on when you need to recalibrate things or clean certain things or get notifications about that information. So you don't have to have that in the back of your head or have a separate schedule for that. It can be built into the program to notify you. And it's one of those nice things where you set it up once and you're done forever. You can rotate from year to year in those elements. But with that, we can track other similar things. Think material data safety handling sheets. Think, and this has never happened for the group, right? I'm being facetious when I say this, but want to know where samples are located in your environment. Everybody, whether, especially like in freezers or coolers, you have a problems locating those. You can specify different location fields for all of that information. I even have customers for really expensive or rare things that they shoot videos for their staff and upload them into the program and exactly where to find things. You can have the system actually do automatic inventory reduction for you. What am I telling you? No more running out of that key reagent. How many of us have sat down at the lab, grabbed everything together to do a key experiment, reach for that key reagent, and it's gone because the inventory hasn't been updated? That's a thing of the past as well. Things like that. So hopefully that answered your question.
I
Yeah,
want
it
to add
actually does.
I want to
Yep.
add two little points. One is I actually just run a webinar about inventory, and I want to encourage everyone here to think of inventory not just as inventory, but also as part of your data infrastructure. The ability to trace back to which inventory item was used and to connect those things is really something that, traceability, regulatory requirements meets, making sure things, even if you have turnover or accidents, like you are able to recover and know where things came from. That is actually really critical. And most of the time we think of inventory as, location, when to order things, when is something going to run out. But I encourage everyone to think beyond that and then think of the inventory items as part of your data management structure. And another key thing I want to mention is that we have a reason, this is a recent development, which is that we now have a partnership with this company called Ganymede. And what they offer is an interface to allow you to connect to instruments, platforms, and whatnot. So that's another thing that's more extensive. So you're not looking for just, using API to quickly connect to something, but you're looking for more of an extensive ability for that. Then that's something that we can also accommodate at SciNote now with the partnership with Ganymede. So I'm happy to also add that to Wade's answer.
That's great because that actually I was going to ask some further questions about that because you mentioned your development team, and I was going to ask if there was anyone on staff that actually works with like the API development, or because I know that one of the issues with having like an open API system, and I'm quickly getting out of my depth here, but is that you have varying qualities coming from the other direction into your system, and with this interoperability being such a difficult and sticky point with a lot of very high intensity tools. I was wondering if that was a difficult issue for you guys, but it sounds like you have a partnership that's addressing that exact problem. So that's great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wait, go
And
ahead.
if I may add, Michael, with that, one of the unique factors with SciNote with this is not only do we have the capability to do what you're talking about, but we have the capability of making it really a relatively easy, straightforward, stress-free process. And that's the caveat, because everybody hears these things and they think, when they hear interfaces, they think, oh my gosh, it's going to cost hundreds of thousands of dollars and take months to do. And it's really not like that. It's a very simple, quick, and easy process. And the best part about this process is one of the things that we do fundamentally different from the 100 or so electronic lab notebooks that are in the marketplace today is we give you a dedicated customer success manager. This person's only job is to help you set up the site, help you customize it, help you get your information set up inside of it correctly, and help train your staff on how to utilize every aspect of it. And they're your helper, so to speak, to walk you through this process to make it quicker, easier, more efficient. And basically, we provide an unlimited amount of that service for our customers for the length of our agreement for free. We charge nothing for this in those elements. And we all understand we've got about 50 items on our action list that we have to do. And we understand that ELNs are kind of towards the bottom of that typically. And so we try to make this an easy process for customers in those aspects. So it's one of those ways to just take that one more thing off of our customers' plates.
So while we're waiting for other questions to come in too, I was going to ask, so you mentioned some of the safety data that can kind of be offloaded onto the ELN. So one of the groups that I organize here at BioForward is our environmental health and safety group. And one of the things that we talk about a lot there too is sustainability. And I know that's becoming an increasingly large priority for a lot of laboratory-based companies. And I'm wondering if any of your clients or if you have any experience with people trying to use an ELN to track, plastic usage or like, or wasted chemicals or anything like that to achieve some sustainability goals that they have?
That's right. Just as how you can track items that you're utilizing in your environment, whether it be samples or reagents or that nature, you can also track other items. So time spent, dollars spent on items. You also have the capability of tracking, disposable items. Hazardous waste items come up often in these regards, so it's a similar role. But absolutely, this is something I've heard from many customers, and you're absolutely correct. It's a growing trend in the industry, and you can track that information. So you can track that to achieve your own, company sustainability goals in those aspects. Theresa, do you have things to add to that?
Yeah, I want to speak to like what Wade mentioned, which is the flexibility of our inventory management system, as well as the structure of the notebook. I'm actually embarking on project to, track marketing materials in our platform, and that speak to how flexible that is, which is that if you're tracking hazardous material, trying to meet sustainability goals and whatnot, the system is so customizable that we're really looking at a flexible system that can help you track, a structure that can help you track different materials within the lab, and sometimes even be that beyond that. So I would say that really speak to the flexibility of the product.
And one more added point to give them just kind of idea to put this in context. We have a customer, many customers that do actually do everything from R&D all the way through to production for utilizing SciNote. We have them use those elements, and one of the things that they do with manufacturing is you're talking about for manufacturing different items. You could be talking about what tens or hundreds of different components that may go into a particular item that customers are using today to manage that workflow and tracking that information. So if you can think about tracking, individual screws or widgets, you can contemplate any possibility of anything that's out there. Mm-hmm.
How does it work with working with outside contractors? Is there like again, I'm kind of out of my depth here, but I would imagine that a lot of these large laboratory-based companies have internal contract groups that may need to access certain data or may need to be inputting certain data into a lab notebook. How is that dealt with, and how do you maintain security throughout that process?
Yeah, collaboration's what you're essentially talking about here is collaboration from whether
Yeah.
it's cross department or within the company or even outside of your company. And this can be a very sticky issue from time to time. A lot of my customers are dealing with this, and there's two challenges really when you think about it. The first one is if you're working with somebody, you may be, working with that person now over things like email or Slack or sharing other ways. And there's two problems with doing this. First of all, you've got your information spread out in different places. It's hard to keep track of searching it, finding it, locating it. Again, it's a time sink, right? So that's the first element. The second one, which is a little bit more insidious, is it becomes a security issue. If you have your important data and you email it to somebody, you may even, you may have NDAs in place, whatever, but truly you're losing control over what happens to that data. So it's important with SciNote, you can have one central location to have all of your data in, and these individual people, like individual collaborators, you can provide them access, and you can leave it as broad or limit it down to whatever access you want to have them work with you inside of SciNote and collaborate with you on a real-time basis inside of the program. And again, solves the security issue because everything's in one place where it's completely, password protected and backed up and encrypted. But the other aspect of that is now you have all of your data in one place where it's searchable and reportable with your records. So you have all that information there. Mm-hmm.
I can quickly add to that, and I want to refer back to one of the use cases I mentioned, which is advanced cellular dynamics. When I interviewed them for their feedback, and they're one of the reasons why they chose SciNote, and they mentioned that it's something that not all the ELN was able to achieve. It's the ability for them to dedicate a particular area for their own like client and separate that from another client, and that kind of like the ability to make it segregated and make sure that access is only limited to a particular client's data is really extremely critical for that. And they mentioned that that's one of the main reasons why they decided to go for SciNote, is the ability to be able to do that finite control, like a very specific control of like the data, so that they don't cross contaminate the data with other clients' data. And that for me, for them, is the critical point.
Just got a question in. So regarding using SciNote for a simple solution, does this also include utilizing electronic system to capture manual data entries? So the company in question already has a decent document management system to provide procedures, but not really enter data.
Okay, great question. And we actually run into this a lot, where a lot of customers have very dedicated policies and procedures and ways of sharing that data, but extrapolating that and the collaboration side of that is where things start to get fuzzy for them. And what we have is a capability to, first of all, there's two ways of dealing with this. You essentially can take that entire structure and build it inside of SciNote. It can be built in, it can be put inside of SciNote, and it's not as intensive as you might think it is. If you have the data already electronically, it can be a matter of cutting and pasting the information, and you have a customer success manager to help you give tips and tricks to make this process effortless for you. The second side of that is using the APIs. Maybe you don't even have to pull it in at all. You can link to the information, where you, and this is kind of the best of both worlds with linking, because you can link or connect information and share data effortlessly across different systems as well. So yes.
Yeah. I think also that I think usually what the challenge I've seen users is really that first step of mapping the data. And it's usually the most important step, because once you map the data and once you have the structure, that migration of what Wade talked about is to have that everything in SciNote, and that just is the next step, is actually the more straightforward part. So the mapping part, usually, once we handle the mapping part, the actual migration or actual linking things is not actually overly difficult. There's also the part about manual data, as in like if we're looking at like manual data entries that can go in directly, and SciNote can definitely very easily also allow that. There's also the part where if you have a lot of data on paper, what do you do with that? And here is what we recommend. If you scan it, attach it, make sure it's part of that paper trail, make sure that that's part of your management system. That's also another thing that I mentioned in the inventory management webinar that I get recently, is that try to keep everything digital, right? And that's very important. It can be a scan, it can be a photo, but try to keep that trail of digital, because if it's not digital, it's extremely difficult to ensure traceability. And I know that people are still a bit stuck on the quote unquote paper trail, and that's what I heard before. But really, an electronic system allows you to really expand on that traceability, to go beyond just pieces of paper trail that can be in place. Really keep that everything in that system.
Great. Well, if there aren't any more questions, I think we will wrap it up and give people a little bit of time to get to their next meeting. But just wanted to thank you, Wade and Theresa, for a great presentation. I know I learned a lot, and I hope the people in attendance did too. Well, thank you very much. And
thank you for having us.
Yeah,
yes,
you're welcome.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you for having us. And we appreciate the opportunity to educate today.
Great.
Thank you both.
Good rest of your day, everybody.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Bye. Bye, Mike.
Bye.
Goodbye now.